Hi, and welcome to Monday's podcast. We're going to be covering profit and cost, which we're going to be talking about straightforward in the brokerage, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. It's some of the topics we're covering when we're looking at profit and losses. Don't forget, Wednesday we released the newsletter, the weekly newsletter, and all the up-to-date geopolitical, political, and all the things around the challenge, all the updates, WTO, what we're seeing in ONS, what we're seeing in OECD, and all the other challenges around the world with road transport, RHA. So please, we have it on post now every Wednesday. We'll also be delivering it as a newsletter. Friday, obviously, we have our sales and strategy. And Sunday, we have our new one on Sunday, which is quite exciting. We're doing the history podcast, which will be very interesting. We're going to be doing it on the Silk Road. And it's really quite interesting, actually, the Silk Road and modern supply chains. It's a different take on how we do the podcast. It's going to be a history throughout history, and it's going to really combine the two so you start to understand how things have evolved and not really changed. So that's quite exciting. Anyway, today we're going to be covering the key topic around who is really handling your cargo. This is something that I see all the time, coming from a freight forwarding background and having my own services. Obviously, we had our own services to Spain, Italy, Portugal, Germany, and then other markets. If we had some other markets, we'd be a broker really, and we'd use other freight forwarders who had their own services. But that's one of the things I wanted to come across today. Who's really handling your cargo? When we talk about challenges in communication, in particular, a good freight forwarder has to be very strong in communication, because if he's not strong in his communication and his customer service, a lot of things can fail. And also a lot of things like visibility, because you're giving it to a freight forwarder who might be then broken, getting 4 or 5 different prices from different freight forwarders who offer their own services and trying to get that price. He's giving you a price, a cheap price, and he's trying to get a price, and then he's not really got everything in within that price. He's not kind of got the brokerage in there and lots of other things. And suddenly you lose a little bit of control, and also who's collecting the goods, etc. So there's a few challenges there, and visibility is one key area. Accountability, who's actually responsible? So if something goes wrong drastically and you're speaking to the freight forwarder, and they're then as a broker having to go through whoever's carrying it, it could have gone through 4 or 5 different hands, and that's why sometimes we see a lot of delays in responses back. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're happy to do that, it's perfectly fine to do that, but you've got to be aware of the responsibilities, and particularly when things go wrong. There's exposure. How many hands touch your cargo? There's a lot of, we call that the supply chain exposure. Again, another area to think about. And then the hidden cost, what fees are buried in cheaper quotes? Could you got that price somewhere else? Could you got a better price? I've seen it, and I still see it today that, companies have a person, and all they're doing is ringing 3 to 4 carriers or freight forwarders and getting the cheapest price. And then whoever's the cheapest price, they might even be cheaper by £3. And they'll use somebody who's a broker as opposed to actually somebody who's delivering and looking after cargo all the way through as the actual carrier of the goods. And it amazes me in this industry. It really does, if I'm being perfectly honest, of how people employ, or somebody just literally sits on the desk and 3 or 5 cheapest prices, when actually you could save yourself a fortune and get a yearly contract with a freight forwarder who's got the services. And there's some good freight forwarders out there. There's some good freight forwarders who don't have services, who just rely very much on farming your cargo out as a broker. But again, if you had a bit more experience, why are they getting 3 or 4 prices? If you've employed a person to do that for you, why don't you train them? Why don't you get them doing the actual proper brokerage themselves? So again, it's just some key areas to think about. It's very important. We see as a modern freight, and I put this in red, the company quoting your shipment may never physically control your shipment. So what happens when something goes drastically wrong? And once you've given your instructions and given your commercial invoice and everything else, what accountability then where does that go? They pass it on as a broker, but you think you've got that direct relationship, you think that freight forwarder is carrying your cargo. It's questions you should be asking. Like I said, there are a lot of good ones and there's a lot of good freight forwarders, but again, this is more from an exporter to just understanding an importer. Shipments are subcontracted multiple times. We see that all the time. Freight, normally moves across agents. So again, it moves different agent networks depending how the goods are being handled. Your visibility reduces. communication becomes a bit far. How many times do you phone somebody and you're waiting for them and you think, come on, you should know where my cargo is. And to be fair, they're only going down the chain to find out where the cargo is, who's actually physically got the cargo to find out exactly what's happened with the cargo. That could take hours and hours. It's always, so communication gets fragmented. Accountability weakens during disruption. You see that. Who takes accountability for it? So again, it's just some key things to look out for and understanding how the freight market works. If you're happy doing that, there's nothing wrong. But just being aware, and this is the whole point of the channel, we're not just covering exports, imports, covering freight forwarders, freight, logistics, air freight, sea freight, all the key areas. I mean, if you're moving sea freight, they're going to be using shipping lines, etc. So that's slightly different because they're not a shipping line themselves, unless you're dealing directly with Maersk and people like that. But in most cases, you're dealing with a third party there. But certainly on road freight and even UK freights, who's accountable, who you're actually using to move that cargo. Again, just behind the scenes, your client you hire, we call it a broker. I mean, just to make it simplified, the broker then finds the best agent he can use, and the agent then consolidates, and that goes then to the final carrier. So it goes down a few chains before it's actually controlled, and that's a challenge sometimes. We always said cheap freights don't always become, and not always the cheapest, because they can become the most expensive in a supply chain, especially if things go wrong, especially if there's weak communication, if they've not passed on. And I had this recently. We used the freight forwarder, well, not me, they used the freight forwarder, and I said, make sure with the freight forwarder, in my experience, you keep them fully notified and you make sure that freight forwarder is keeping you fully up to speed with everything. And you could see once the goods have been given, and obviously they then took ownership of the goods. The communication was okay, but it was quite poor in areas where nobody really had any visibility of what was happening. When there was an issue or when there could have been an issue, it could have been resolved a lot earlier than it was. And what happened on the last minute, there was issues at border because there was some more documents that needed, but we'd asked that for 2 weeks. We've been asking the freight forwarder for 2 weeks look, what information do you need? Let's send it to you so you've got it so you can pass on to whichever agent you're using in the country it's going into. And no communication. Yeah, you get that lovely email. Yes, we're looking after it. But then when everything hits the fan, it becomes a mess. And then all of a sudden, just as it's arriving the day before, you're spending the whole day trying to sort a problem that could have been resolved 2 weeks ago. That's what really frustrates me in this industry. It really does. That could end up demurrage detention, because what happened with this particular shipment, we was arguing the point on some of the customs charges, and we were told that we're going to get demurrage because it was being cleared and it needed to be released from the port. I understand that, but this again could have been done. So again, it's very clear on communication. Customs delays, again, I've seen instances where you give everything and then all of a sudden there's an issue with customs, but again, it could have been resolved. It should have been resolved 3 days before it actually happened, but it doesn't because it's going down the chain and somebody's been notified and then they haven't notified the person within the brokerage and then they haven't notified you. It becomes a major problem. Or there's errors in the documentation. And again, it's not being passed down the chain. Emergency freight, where it's absolute emergency and timelines, are absolutely critical, and you give it, you've gone for the best price. I have no understanding why people do this, but anyway. It's been going on for 30 years. So it's not for me to judge, but I get the best price and you lose and it's urgent. It's always a job, isn't it? They want the cheapest price or you want the cheapest price, but it has to be there with your customer and you want the cheapest price. How's that, how's the balance there? It's like going into Harrods, isn't it, and buying something, but saying, no, I want to pay this price, but I want the best. And it's the same principle. So I can never kind of quite fit that in my mind. Customs delivery failures because it's contractual. There's a lot of hidden issues within there, and as communication really fails. So again, your hidden fees can erode your margins because suddenly it's cost you more money because you've got demurrage charges, custom charges, all these things that you weren't expecting, and that'll just be passed on. It's very important when you're working with a freight forwarder, and freight forwarders will be happy to do this for you, to have a service level agreement with them. What are your expectations? If a freight forwarder wants to work with you, what are your expectations, or courier? What are your expectations from them? Because they want you to sign power of attorney and all the documents for you. But what responsibility are they taking to look after you? What reports are they doing? I do the apprentices, I'm an EPA and apprentice, and, coming across a lot of these apprentices, communication in their industry is key. I see it, all the time that, customer relationship. So don't be frightened of asking about that service level. They'll be happily do that with you because you have expectations, they'll have expectations as well from you. What are they expecting from you? Clean commercial invoice, clean packing list with the correct weights. How many times do you give a packing list and the commercial invoice and the weights are incorrect, and then the freight forwarder or the agent passes it to his customs team, and his customs team then go back to him and say that when the weights don't match, you've then got to rectify, and that's then goes back to you. So checking your documents, checking your commodity code, your description, 8 digits. Don't use this 10. Have your Incoterms on there. All the key things you should be thinking about, because if you're not on there and something goes wrong, there's also that level of effect. Also, well, you didn't put it on here. We're guessing. We're just assuming that what you give us is correct. We're direct representation, so I'm sorry, the responsibility is with you. So just, it's very important to understand that. Global supply chains now are becoming more fragile than ever. Why this is worse, we've got AI customs tags and automated risk profile increases scrutiny on shipments for incomplete. So, WCO are already going down that road. HMRC, lots of, customs around the world will be doing this. AI is playing a key role and it can pick up that data pretty quick. Geopolitical, I can never say that for some reason here. Geopolitical instability and tariff wars, trade route disruptions, Red Sea conflict, escalating tariffs, Iran, all the things around there, and carrier volatility and border controls, increased in border enforcements, delays, and all the things around that. You have to be in control of that. You have to be as much as in control as you can. And the only way that you can do that is by working with the right forwarders and the right agents to make sure you've got clear communication. It's very important. Questions you should be asking: who physically controls my shipment? Who files my customs data? I mean, how many people check box 14 in the CDS on the declarant? Who's actually doing your customs brokerage? Is it, if it's is it Kuehne Nagel? More than likely it is. If it's a freight forwarder, who's doing that customs? Be very clearly listed on there with the EUR number on there. So again, just check it. Who's responsible for delays? Who is responsible for that? Is that you? Or is that the agent? What's your service level agreement? Can I see full logistics chain end to end? More than likely not. But if you're working with a carrier who has agents around, in Europe or whatever, you'll be able to give you that full visibility. You can pick up the goods. He'll normally have, pallet network, as we know, the obsession now with pallet networks to keep the cost down. Pallet network collects it, takes it to the hub. The hub then collects it in the hub. Then the hub then in the evening takes it down to you or to the warehouse. The warehouse then load it. You start thinking about this, how many times it's handled. They then load it onto the trailer. That trailer then goes to whichever destination, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, wherever it's going to, into a hub. The hub then unloads it. Again unloads it and then out for delivery. It could be again on a pallet network, so it goes to the local hub in that network and then delivers. So imagine you're going into Spain, everything goes into Madrid or to Run at the top side. It gets unloaded in Run, but actually it's going to Barcelona or it's going to, I don't know, Pontevedra. It gets handled here, it goes to the local depot then in Pontevedra, and then Pontevedra then unload it and put it on the vehicle. That's handled 6 times. Is your cargo, can it be handled 6 times? They're the questions should be. And if it is handled 6 times, is your packaging and your pallets, are they secure enough to be able to be handled that many times? That's a key question to think about. So again, the new currency trade, the visibility is becoming more vulnerable than price. As we say, in an era of fragile supply chains, knowing exactly who controls cars, got every handover, is a competitive advantage. I'm not saying you should know everything, but you should have good traceability. That's a good supply chain. I never understand why people do it. You spend so much money getting the best price, and then you get the best price and forget about it. It always amazes me. You want to check that full visibility. Knowing your supply chain is very important. Again, you know your chain, control your risk, audit your chain, demand transparency, and calculate true cost. It's very important. If you're working, depending on who you're working with, it's very important that you decide who's doing that, and it's very important to decide how that's going to work. And if you think of AI, if you it's fantastic in it. If you look at the photo on the left-hand side, the man that might just amuse you if you get to this stage. He's turned back, he's got his back to you with his neck. It's quite comical, that, isn't it? And you know what? I put that on there for a reason because I want you to smile when you read this last page. Obviously, if you don't get to this page, you're not going to see it. But I just left it on there. I saw it and I thought, I'm not going to change it. I'm going to leave it on there and just see if anybody actually spots it. I think it's quite amusing because we have to have a bit of lightheartedness when we're doing podcasts. It's very important. Very excited. This is a real challenge for me. I've spent a lot of time in history, as a lot of people who know me. I've been looking at history and how it all combines with supply chain. And I want to talk about the Silk Road. I've done a lot of research on this over the last few years, and great to read the Silk Road history. And I'm going to bring that together and explain the kind of how it's evolved, but actually how it's the same. Very interesting. That'll be every Sunday and then every 2 weeks, because obviously a lot of work goes in the background. But I think you'll really enjoy listening, or you can listen to it obviously on the podcast, or you can watch. But I think you'll find that really interesting. So again, thanks for joining us. It's weekly, as you know, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thanks for the people now who are jumping on and now subscribers. It's really good to see we're getting a lot more people now watching the podcast and enjoying them. Again, drop us a line if there's something that you'd like us to cover or you want me to cover. It's not an issue for me. I'll cover whichever topic you want in international trade if you feel it's worthwhile. Again, AI powered diagnostics. We're doing AI. We know all about AI. So if anybody wants any things on AI, we're already in AI. We're already writing programs. We've already created some products which we think are game changers within the industry and our trade intelligence. And you'll see that in the History of Trade series. Again, like I said, this Sunday. All we ask is for you to subscribe. That's the only thing we ask for. And thanks for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Wednesday when we're doing the newsletter. And again, the newsletter will be an up-to-date newsletter on everything that's happening.